I had no idea what industrial hygiene was. I didn't have a single class, let alone a degree in it. I wasn't in that field. It was really just one of those moments, Ashish. You have to look for the opportunities and just go for it.
Like, what is the scope for a story to come in and help your, balance storytelling with the constraints of expert witness rules?
Especially if it seems like it's really bordering more on a story, especially if the story is self-serving. For whatever specific reason, it can't be self-serving though. It has to serve the purposes of the case.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of On the Stand with Ashish Arun. Today, we are joined by Jonathan Klane, a 35-year veteran of environmental health and safety who brings something rare to expert witness work, a deep understanding of why juries respond to stories more powerfully than statistics, backed by his own PhD research on narrative and risk perception. Jonathan holds 4 premier certifications in the field. He is a certified industrial hygienist, a certified safety professional, a certified hazardous materials manager, and certified instructional trainer. He also has a master's degree in adult education, which directly shapes how he communicates complex technical concepts to lay audiences. His career spans consulting, academia, and industry. At Arizona State University, he served as Assistant Director of Safety Programs for the engineering schools, overseeing approximately 500 labs and 20,000 students. He's also held safety leadership roles at UC Davis and major corporations. Today, he runs his own consulting practice. His expert witness work covers workplace injuries, chemical exposures, falls, lockout-tagout failures, and fatalities, primarily for plaintiff attorneys. But what makes him distinctive is his philosophy. He believes data without narrative falls flat, and has built an entire methodology around embedding technical evidence with emotionally resonant stories. He's also been candid about his journey, including being diagnosed on the autism spectrum later in life, which he credits with shaping his systematic approach to both safety and communication. So on that note, Jonathan, welcome to On the Stand.
Thanks so much, Ashish. It's always odd listening to oneself be introduced, so I appreciate it very much.
I hope I was able to do justice to this illustrious career that you've had.
You did a great job, and I will say that it was nice that I didn't write all of that you guys wrote it.
Yeah. So tell us something about how you found your way into industrial hygiene and safety. Like, was there a defining moment that made you realize this was your calling?
Yeah, I like that. A great start. So I was working in marketing support for a filter manufacturer, and I had an undergraduate degree in geology, and I was trying to get back into that. And I applied to an environmental engineering firm as an environmental engineer, environmental scientist, geologist. They had a position open. They also had another position in the little classified ad back in the day when we had classified ads that was for something called an industrial hygiene technologist. And I still to this day don't know what a technologist does. And I didn't even really pay attention to it because it wasn't what I was applying to. So I go in for the interview and I'm supposed to interview with the vice president. And instead the president comes out. He says, "Hi, I'm Weldon. I'm the president. Doug's not available." Says, "Looking at your resume, you could work in any of our groups, environmental engineering, environmental science, or industrial hygiene. I think this is great." And we chatted. And then Doug came out and he interviewed me. And he said, "Hey, John, I'm really sorry, but we already filled the position for environmental scientist, geologist. What would you think about helping us open an office in Augusta, Maine as an industrial hygienist?" And of course, I said, "Sure. I'd love to. That sounds great," because I wanted the job. I had no idea what industrial hygiene was. I didn't have a single class, let alone a degree in it. I wasn't in that field. It was really just one of those moments, Ashish.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made on the spot. You have to look for the opportunities and just go for it, which I think a lot of people recognize these days.
Yeah.
And so that was the origin, the moment when I think I knew that this was I'm not even sure I know that it's still my calling. I think it has to do with what I think every industrial hygienist does. They want to help people stay healthy.
Yeah.
And so as I saw, I think later in my career, that I actually could make a difference. I think it would be, and we can come back to it. I'll tease it. At Arizona State, I got into a lot of situations where I helped grad students in particular through moments of crisis.
Yeah.
And when I was in college at UMass, I actually physically stopped a kid on my floor. I was a resident assistant. I stopped him from jumping out the window, and we were on the 16th floor. So, with those sorts of different points in my journey, I think it's really the focus on what is the potential difference I can make in the lives of others.
And at Arizona State, you were also responsible for safety across 500 labs and 20,000 students.
Yeah.
And before we come to that, you were I really want to ask you this. You were also known as the bald-headed safety guy there. So was that persona intentional? And what did you learn about building safety culture at scale when so many labs and such a large number of students? So how was that experience like? So first the persona and then the scale.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. You anticipated my question, which was, okay, you got two things here. Which do you want me to go for first? So thank you. You're very skilled at this, Ashish. I love it. So not your first rodeo, as that, saying in metaphor goes, which maybe we'll come back to that sort of concept. So, yes, it was purposeful, the persona of the bald-headed safety guy. And I was thinking about it this morning, actually. And how did it all start? Because I still have a card. So when I was at ASU, I saw that we gave cards to each other. And I wasn't used to that. I had not worked at a place with, thousands of other staff and faculty and students. And I was like, we give cards to each other? And they're like, it's so huge, John, you have to. And so I was, assistant director. And it's like, assistant director? I don't assist anyone. I'm like a director. I don't like this. And I heard, I believe it was, I think I know who it was. I think it was Carolyn, who referred to me as, oh yeah, what's his name? Oh, that bald-headed safety guy, right? Because as a consultant, I had been called the safety guy, the air quality guy, the mold guy, the OSHA guy, the training guy, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was like, the bald-headed safety guy, I really like that, right? And so I like to say, when I would give people cards and I would say, take a look at my title, which sounds so pretentious. And they'd be like, oh, really? Look at your title, And then they'd see it said bald-headed safety guy. And then, of course, burst out laughing, which was what I wanted. I learned from my dad, who was a traveling shoe salesman. He sold to stores, right? He wasn't like Al Bundy on Married with Children, if you're familiar with that old show. And so I learned that you want to develop the relationship right away, and a little bit of self-deprecation, and he was bald too, is a good thing. And so I did it, and it caught on, and people loved it, and it was a great opening, and they could see that as a safety guy, I didn't take myself so seriously. And so that was really my the origin story, and it's just stuck. People still love it to this day.
Like you did a really smart thing there by choosing self-deprecation, because again, like that's the best type of sense of humor that one can have, where without any risk of offending anyone, you're still able to put your thoughts out and make your mark.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the learning about building safety culture at scale.
Yeah.
With the persona of the bald-headed safety guy.
The bald-headed safety guy.
How did you do that?
So the bald-headed safety guy persona helped in many ways, including that it made me come across as more approachable. Here's this guy. He's a lot older than the grad students, right? A lot are international. They were all wonderful people, but a little bit, they don't want to say the wrong thing, of course, and all of that. And I empathize so dearly with them. They were just wonderful people. And it just made it easier because it's like, oh my God, I don't want to come across as an authority figure. And that wasn't my role. My role was much more consultative than compliance. I reported to the dean's office in engineering, not to EHS. I collaborated with EHS. So the first thing I would say is I did not do this alone, right? I mean, my role was to facilitate it, but the saying, it takes a village, right, to raise a child. Well, it takes a team to help facilitate environmental health and safety. So I had staff, small, but very meaningful. I had a lot of, I don't know if they were indirect reports, but I had a team within engineering, a lot of lab managers, other faculty, et cetera. And then, of course, the entire Department of Environmental Health and Safety. I collaborated with them, they collaborated with me. So for scale, it really was, how do I use this really great integrated team? How do I make it easy on them? How do I help them? And how can I, get them to collaborate with me? And, at times it was really great. And at other times we had a little bits of friction and all of that. But I think that's just part of life. I was going to say part of being human, part of work. It's just part of life, right?
Today's episode of On the Stand is brought to you by Xlightum, the AI-powered platform where attorneys find expert witnesses and experts grow their practice. Every week, hundreds of new experts join Xlightum, giving attorneys instant access to qualified witnesses without any finder's fee or markups. Need someone else to handle the vetting? Our concierge service does it all. You only pay when you retain an expert we present. So whether you are searching yourself or letting us do the heavy lifting, Xlightum makes expert discovery fast and smarter. Visit Xlightum, that's exlitem.com, to find your next expert witness today. Yeah, I mean, you can't move forward without friction. So I think
right.
So,
that's good. Is that a physics quote?
Yeah, I think it's an extrapolation of Newton's third law.
I think it is.
Every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And that is why when you apply force and there's friction, this is, I think, static high school physics that I'm remembering after years. So
can I say what comes to mind? So I'm in Arizona. I live in Arizona. I used to live in Maine, and Maine gets a lot of snow and it gets ice. And I don't know if you've ever seen the videos where there's a vehicle sitting there. Nothing's happening to the vehicle. And all of a sudden it just starts moving because there is zero friction because there's ice and maybe a little bit of water below it. And all of a sudden, and so of course it's gravity that, even if it doesn't look like there's a big slant, there's a little slant. So I think I loved what you said about friction. And it's interesting. And maybe this relates to things, especially with expert witness. Humans are born skeptics. We often think about things and we wonder, and sometimes we're doing, Ashish, in really fun ways about, I wonder if there's an exception to that rule or something like that. Well, when you're in a court, it's not necessarily fun, right?
Okay.
Wow.
So you were also at UC Davis, and there I was reading that you served on the Enterprise-Wide Compliance and Risk Council. So what was this council about, and what does institutional risk management look like at a major research university?
Yeah, so it was enterprise-wide, so from every different group on campus. To be honest, most were at the dean's level and all of that. I was not a dean. I reported to a dean. I was a director, but they invited me to join. They knew I was studying risk in my PhD. They knew my role in engineering, and so I felt very honored to be invited to participate, considering I probably had the lowest rank of every member. I mean, the chancellor of the university was on this, and he was there. And so imagine a huge Excel spreadsheet that tries to sort, categorize, do a little bit of ranking of risks. And people in my field, but I think everyone can relate to it, we often use sort of this biaxial matrix for trying to compare risks. It's not always good for analyzing the risk because it's just two factors, severity and probability, but for trying to compare a lot, it can be useful. And so everything from mass gatherings, which was a significant issue in a lot of the University of California campuses. There were very open campuses and all of this. And this is back pre-pandemic. And then during the pandemic, I was there straddling it. But also, of course, reputational risk, of course, research lab risk, facilities and utilities risk, medical risks. What was interesting is I was on this committee pre-pandemic and then during the pandemic, and the pandemic hadn't been very high up on the list. And we were all like, how did we miss that? Well, the human mind tries to predict things, but it's not accurate at it. Look at Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's work, of course, and many others. And the other was, of course, the pandemic created tremendous pressures, additional to the already existing pressures that the students were under. And so we quickly found that our most significant risk that we were dealing with was indeed mental health and mental health crises and well-being and all of that, which of course I brought into it my own experiences from Arizona State and before that, as I had mentioned. So it's really it's an enterprise risk management, which is just a way of looking at risk across the entire enterprise of organization, but also all of the various risk aspects, not just lab safety, for instance.
That must be a lot of moving parts that you are coordinating it. So you also have 4 major certifications. So two-pronged question. One, which one of these certifications that are most relevant to the litigation work that you do? And can you explain a little for those who may not know what these mean? Can you walk us through what these certifications signify and why they matter for qualifying an expert in industrial hygiene?
Sure. Why don't this time we flip it and I'll do the second one first because I think it helps if people know what I'm talking about before I go into which are more relevant for expert witness work. So in the order that I present them after my name, which foreshadowing, storytelling term does matter. The order matters, which most people I think are aware of, but not everyone. So all of them are certified. The C is always certified, so we can skip that. So industrial hygiene. The easy explanation is it's exposure science. So I'm looking, and it's also illness prevention. Right? So people get exposed to chemicals, to biologic agents, to radiation, to noise, to heat, to all sorts of energy and substances and who knows what, everything under the sun, as we say. And so I'm trying to figure that out. Where are the risks in that? How do we deal with it? So that's really what industrial hygiene is. There's a longer definition for it. I'm not even going to use it, right? So this is communication at its best. My audience is not fellow industrial hygienists who might say, he didn't use the definition that we use. No, I didn't. Because if I'm speaking to attorneys, for instance, or to the jury, I want to use explanations in terms that will resonate with them. Now, if my attorney client says I want the official one too, John, then I would incorporate that, right? After that, certified safety professional. So I think people kind of get that. Safety, usually occupational safety, workplace safety, very, very broad, deep in areas, but, could be any form of safety, right? And so that's usually injury prevention as opposed to illness. But of course, even safety involves typically also some industrial hygiene at a lower level. Hazardous materials manager. So if the CIH and the CSP align closely with OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration here in the States, then Certified Hazardous Materials Manager aligns with our EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and DOT, Department of Transportation, those rules. And so you can see already now I'm trying to EH&S, Environmental Health and Safety, between those 3 designations, I've got it covered. Each one is one of the E, H, or S, not in the same order. And the last one is the least well known, certified instructional trainer. Instructional trainer, isn't that redundant? And I'm like, kind of, yeah. It used to be. So some people still know it this way. It used to be the CET, where the E was for EH&S, environmental health and safety. So it's like, oh, okay, I get it. It certifies you as someone with more skills, knowledge, abilities, attitudes towards training, towards adult learning and all of that. And so it was actually one of the first ones I got. And so that's been helpful because I've had cases where training and communication are issues. And so it fit incredibly well. I think I got it while I was in the middle of getting my master's in adult ed, and my focus was training and development. And so it was an easy one for me to get, and I still have it to this day. So, did you have any questions on that? And then I can segue into, okay, what about in court? What about as an expert witness?
Yeah, I mean, that was the follow-up question, that
Right.
which one is most relevant and most
Right.
frequently relevant in your litigation work as an expert witness?
Right. So I think I would say both of the CIH and CSP, industrial hygiene and safety. They're complementary of each other. If and I've been in this, it's a good prompt, John. If you had to choose one or the other,
Yeah.
that was probably more relevant. And I pick and choose my words with care, right? People who I tell, oh, I'm autistic. I had one woman who said, yeah, I kind of knew that. And I'm like, how? You choose your words with such precision, John. It's really obvious to me. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. Okay. So safety is so broad, and so like some of the things you mentioned, lockout, tagout, and fatalities, and workplaces, and public occupancies, so many of those are for safety. Now, industrial hygiene is, most people would say it's the hardest one to get because it's just so technological, so numbers driven. Some of the knowledge is rather seemingly arcane and all. And I got it back in the day where you didn't have any sheets with the formulae or conversions on it. Everything had to be up here.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm talking about chemical exposures, and I had a beryllium case there, being a CIH was obviously mandatory. I had to be a CIH for that one. So there is this real duality to it that I would say.
Mm-hmm. And do you think this duality and having multiple credentials, do they strengthen your position as an expert during a Dauber challenge or during a deposition or cross, or have people come at you by the aspect that you have so many degrees and you have so many certifications? Are you trying to be an expert on everything? Have you
Right.
ever faced that kind of an attack?
Right. Yeah. I think some of the Dauber challenges go on a little bit behind the scenes. I get
Yeah.
some of it in the deposition and in court, but of course, there's the back and forth between the attorneys and all of that. My CV, like a lot of these, it's rather long and comprehensive. So I think having a lot of different things itself is a bit of a dichotomy, paradox, duality. I'm trying to think of the right word, and it's actually escaping me, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
Let me describe it. It's exactly as you said, Ashish. It helps because I can find my way into that case if I feel that I have enough depth. I might not, right? I might say, I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. And then I have a conversation, which I know we'll get into, how do you go about having those conversations with your client? But easily I've had some say, you're not an engineer, and this is really about engineering. And now I have to defend myself, maybe push back and say, I'm not saying it's not about engineering, but it's really about risk, and I'm a risk expert. I have to find my portion. I can't always spend my time trying to defend what they're attacking me on, because if you try to argue with an attorney while they're grilling you, it's really probably a losing battle. So instead, and maybe this is what that jujitsu, use the energy against, I don't know, right?
Hmm.
Maybe it's not the best metaphor or analogy, but I need to find my part of this instead. And maybe it works. I've survived. I've never been disqualified. So apparently whatever my clients are doing in advance and what I'm doing so far has worked. Maybe part of it is also picking and choosing and making sure I don't take on a course, or at least that I'm disclosing up front. Here are my strengths in this area. Here are the weaknesses that I think opposing counsel may choose to pick on.
No, I think that is a huge asset and plus for an attorney who is approaching an expert who is open about saying that, okay, this is not in my lane and I don't think I should take this case. Because we keep seeing this every now and then that experts who have done expert witness work for years, even decades, they would get excluded for not being qualified. And you'll be shocked that how did that happen and how, if they are unqualified, how did they qualify on all these other cases? And it always happens when they pick something that is overlapping on their area of expertise. But in that particular case, the crux was just a little outside their lane. And that
Right,
is where most exclusions happen. Because
right.
otherwise, an engineer will not take up a medical malpractice case and say, hey, I'll testify as a doctor. That will not happen. But yeah, but what you're saying, so I think the fact that you do that and you objectively turn down cases, that is a big plus and probably a key reason why you have this unblemished track record
I don't
from.
know that it's unblemished, but I appreciate that. I agree with what you're saying. I would add, I think for the people watching, I don't want to turn down, et cetera, et cetera. I would say I haven't turned down very many. I
Mhm.
would say, however, I always have this conversation. Here's where I think I can help,
Yeah.
and here's where I want to tell you that, I'm not this expert, I'm not that. They may pick up on that. It's, let your client make an informed decision, right? And do it up front, right? And so now we all value and tend to trust someone who is open and is turning down, is telling you why you shouldn't hire them.
Yeah.
I was the guy, I was on the board of the Maine Indoor Air Quality Council, and I was chair of best practices, and I would get a lot of the calls from homeowners. I have a mold problem. I don't know what to do, et cetera. I think you need to come out and take a bunch of samples. And I don't want to work for homeowners. They can't afford you. They're more likely to sue, et cetera.
Yeah.
And they don't need me. And so I would spend time on the phone telling them, you don't need to hire me. If you have a mold problem, you have a water or moisture problem, fix the water or moisture problem. Spend your limited money, right, on
Yeah.
fixing the problem. Oh, but I need to know how many mold spores. I'm like, well, you could pay me $1,000 and I will come out and I will take a bunch of samples and I will write you a very nice report. And it's probably going to say the same stuff I'm telling you right now. And
Yeah.
you'll feel like you wasted that money that you could have spent on the fix. And so people really valued that. And so doing that with my attorney clients, they really value that. And the other thing that I think is very relevant, I don't know what the attorney believes the case is really about. My role is to help with the technical aspects. Sometimes I've been hired just to help educate them. And the case usually doesn't proceed, very far. It usually settles, but they have a plan where they need to come up to speed and they appreciate what I'm bringing and they're willing to pay it. And they don't have a long-term plan of necessarily using me in a deposition in court. Even long cases I've been on, I haven't always been deposed or gone to court. Sometimes I need someone to analyze all of these other reports, look at these depositions. I think that you're our guy to do that. So let's do that. Yeah.
So what percentage of cases go to a deposition or a trial testimony?
Yeah. So the first thing I will be honest about is, from my perspective, it's a rather small data set. So I'm not going to
Mm.
generalize.
Yeah.
So speaking just
Mhm.
for my own, I would say it's fairly low.
Mhm.
It's probably 25%. And I'll admit there's a bias of round numbers.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you it can't be 25% because I picked that out of the air, right? It can't be right. Maybe it's 24%, maybe it's 28, right?
Yeah.
Even if I got that close, I probably didn't. But it's on the important thing here. This is the difference between what's really important, quantitative or
Yeah.
qualitative. Well, it's really to say that it's a low percentage. It's certainly less than
Mhm.
half in my experience. I think a lot of cases settle. Courts want to settle. Attorneys on both sides want to settle, etc. So I think it's not as many, but they get the attention because it is quite an experience to be in a deposition and also to be grilled in the chair, as we say.
Yeah, and those are the transcripts that then make their way into court records and then
Yeah,
your expert reports. I mean, yeah, but then the real work does happen behind the scenes, and most of the cases don't get that far. So,
right.
but then where do these cases go then? Can you walk us through what a typical industrial hygiene investigation would look like? And from the first call to the final report, it,
Sure.
yeah, doesn't have to be detailed, but
Yeah.
at least give
Yeah.
our audience a fair sense of what these cases would require the expert to do, especially
Right.
for an attorney who may be thinking about hiring an industrial hygiene expert.
Yeah, sure. So they don't always involve the hired expert witness industrial hygiene consultant doing their own sampling, but it can include that.
Okay.
So I can think of one case in particular. It does also happen to be mold. So I got a call. Hey, John, we've got a case. I hear that you do this work. I'm like, sure. Here's what it's about. What I'd like is for you to take a look at the opposing counsel's expert and their report. So the first thing I'm doing, they tell me the basics of it, right?
Okay.
The opening meeting is always, here's what the case is about, John, right? There was water incursion in this. It actually was a home, very nice home. And they supposedly got mold and the case, blah, 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 blah. And they lost. And now that homeowner is suing her original attorney. We're defending. So there's now this underlying case.
Okay.
It gets a little layered and
Yeah.
complex. So my client was hired to defend another attorney who
Okay.
was being sued for not doing a good enough job, right? She didn't like the outcome. The client didn't like the outcome. So I'm looking at another expert's work, whom I knew. So the first thing is, hey, I know these people, right? I've worked with them, etc. He's like, yeah, it's fine. That happens all the time. Don't worry. I'm like, okay. He's like, let's talk. And so we talk. First thing is, do you want me to write anything? Do you want me to send it? Do you want to have a conversation? It's usually like, don't write anything. Let's get on a call. Let's talk this through, right? So we do. And I say, here are the holes. Here are my critiques. Here are the things that I think that, they didn't do well, right? Here are the problems. Here are the problems with the conclusions, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you want to go from here? So it's really educate them about the first step. Where does my client want to go? Two attorneys, a primary, like a partner, and then an associate. And they said, we want you to go out there. So arrange a time. I go out there. I do my own sampling. So now we end up eventually in court, right? I'm not even sure that we did deposition.
Yeah.
Hard to remember when you're going back a couple of, like maybe 3 decades. And so we end up in court, Ashish, with competing experts and competing reports. And so there's a lot of complexity to it. I have a feeling we'll talk more about this, so I don't want to just keep going and going. But to finish the outline, or the chronology, I guess, not a great story so far, which is why chronologies are not stories. And I could go off on a tangent on that, but I won't unless you ask me to. Maybe go into depositions. I've done that where I've had to pick apart someone else's report. Someone who was a PhD, a professor, etc. I knew him and I have to critique his report. That was a different case. That was another one. But in this one, some colleagues, I had to pick apart the report, and I attack the report, not the people.
Yeah.
Right? I never once mentioned it, none of them are a CIH. I did not use that at all because that's attacking the person and the credentials. If my client wants to do that, we can have a conversation, but really it's about how is the report written? How was the samples collected? What did they technically do wrong? Not why might they not be qualified or something like that can easily be argued, right? And so then after all of the witnesses do their thing, testify, then it's in the hands of the jury unless the two sides settle. And in this case, they did not settle. And my client won. I never say I won.
Yeah.
I even hesitate to say we won. I was on the team, as they said. It's not my case. I'm their witness. I'm their expert. Some would call me a hired gun. That's fine. I don't take offense. But it's the attorney's case. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
I don't have skin in that game. I honestly have no idea how many cases I've been involved with where my client prevailed versus did not. I don't track it because I don't need to. I don't want to.
No, I couldn't agree more on that, because honestly, it's none of the experts' business to support the side has retained them. You have to support the science and the facts. So as long as an expert's doing that, that's all they need to care about. And yeah, I mean, if you have to track metrics, probably track was there a Dober challenge?
Right.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. Another thing that I ask experts to track if they can is how many attorneys are talking to them but not retaining them. Probably if you know the name of the case, remember to go back and check the case, see if they haven't designated you without your permission.
That's a good question. I don't know that. And you know what? That's certainly quite possible. Yeah, sure. I know the ones that preceded. Yeah.
It happens more than you and I would like it to happen. But so we will come back to the chronologies are not stories. But before we go there, I want to ask you, when you see, you reviewed the opposing experts report in this case that you were talking about. So when you look at these expert reports, probably in this case or maybe other cases, what are some of the common weaknesses that you have noticed experts having or mistakes that they are making in industrial hygiene cases?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it's not necessarily the industrial hygiene that they are in error. And I made a quantitative mistake in a report. And needless to say, my client was not real pleased. That was that first one. And I think we'll come back to that. But what I've seen is maybe drawing conclusions that aren't well represented by the data. That's a common problem in any form of research. Is we did this study and now we want to generalize, or now we want to draw this conclusion or that, and it can be obvious that the conclusion they're trying to draw favors their client, of course, right? And I get that. I understand that. I think so those things occur. I think it's more the communication style. It's we're too used to technical writing. I think most industrial hygiene and safety reports, but especially industrial hygiene, are written for other industrial hygienists. I don't want to say people are showing off. They are using their own language. The lingua franca, I think, is the term for it, right? And it's jargon, right? Yeah. It's rather arcane. It's hard to understand. I think the other metaphor would be for the non-industrial hygienist, it's opaque. I can't see through this. What are they saying? Sometimes, I'll be honest, Ashish, I have read other CIH's reports, not always as an expert, but as another industrial hygienist. And I'm not even sure what they're saying. And I'm like, if I can't understand this, how the heck are the people directly involved going to understand it? And industrial hygienists and other professionals will often say, well, I'm writing for the attorneys. And I will push back and say, I've worked for a lot of attorneys. They struggle with a lot of this jargon. They're very smart and they learn really well. Attorneys are very good learners. Attorneys are great learners. Teachers are great learners. Librarians are great learners. A lot of people are, but I'm impressed by those groups. So I know we're going to talk about storytelling for lawyers, which is actually the name of a book. But there's another book about writing, nonfiction. It's by William Zinsser. It's called On Writing, the Classic Guide to Writing Nonfiction. Don't confuse it with Stephen King's memoir on writing, right? Which is wonderful if you're doing storytelling. But this one by William Zinsser is really good. And one of his recommendations is this, and I'll end with this, to simplify your language. Never use utilize if you can use. Right?
Yeah.
So the word utilize, and I've been an editor, right? The word utilize is pretty much the same as the word use. Yeah. So don't use a 3-syllable word when you have a very simple 1-syllable word that doesn't add to the syllable count. And if you're looking to try to figure out what grade level a certain writing example is, or something like that, one of the calculations has to do with words and has to do with syllables. The other little quote I would use, which I picked up from an association organization, and it really challenged me, but it was great. Brevity is wit.
Interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah, which I struggle with, as you can see, and as an autistic.
But words, they have this power of winning a particular moment, of an important moment for you, if used right. And that is pretty much the same with storytelling. Mm-hmm. In fact, I'll just clarify. I just looked up the spelling for William Zinsser. So it is with double S, and the book's called On Writing Well.
On Writing Well. Thank you.
So we will link to the book in the show notes for anybody who's interested in checking it out. And in fact, I've been reading a book on storytelling for the brand. It's called, if you can see this, Building a Story Brand 2.0. It's by Donald Miller, and I'm halfway through, and I'm actually realizing that we've not done a great job of telling our story. But even then, and most of us believe that we are good storytellers, and it's the same with a lot of attorneys. So what is your take on storytelling? How did you first get interested in studying storytelling beyond the average curiosity that everybody has? Everybody wants to be a good storyteller, but you took it seriously and you went forward in that direction.
Right. Yeah. No, thanks. I think that's a great question. It's like, where do I want to enter this? So I mentioned my dad, and I learned so much from my dad, right? Mm-hmm. And I used to go on sales trips with him and all. So I saw him interact, and he always was a great storyteller, and he knew how to hold back. Storytelling is not about telling the person everything right away, because now we don't want to hear the rest of it. The narrator, the storyteller, has to hold back. There's actually a term for it that escapes me. And so I learned that. And, like you said, we're fascinated by it. Humans are born storytellers. There's a lot of great neuroscience on this. We are wired for stories. It's, many researchers have said stories are sense-making and meaning-making tools, and very likely a tool for survival, right? And we told stories before we had language. Just look at cave art, like in the Lascaux caves in France. So with all of that, like you're saying, and I agree, we all can tell stories, and we all seem to think that we're fairly good storytellers. I've told terrible stories, self-serving stories, rambling stories that just go on and on. Oh my God,
We
right?
all have, yeah.
Yeah, I think we all do it though. It's just, I mean, again, it's part of life. It's part of being a human, right? So I end up getting into this PhD program called Human and Social Dimensions of Science and Technology at Arizona State. Go Sun Devils. There's my, Sun Devil fork in my background. My son painted it for me. So I'm like, what is this? What is this PhD? Because I was looking for something more in organizational psychology, but I couldn't find what I was looking for. And so I found this one, and I'm like, this is really intriguing. And had an interview and sounded great, enrolled. And then I get paired up with my advisor, Professor Andrew Maynard, who's a former aerosol physicist and worked at NIOSH, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And now he's a technology transfer and risk innovation expert, works worldwide, incredibly smart and heck of a nice guy. And he's like, you have to choose 2 major fields and a minor field. He said, your master's in adult learning can be your minor field. You can drag your master's in. It'll count as 30 credits, even though you did 36. I'm like, okay, great. Done. 2 major fields. I'm like, well, risk is obvious. He's like, yeah, great. So that's one. What do you want for the other? And I said, Andrew, I've always been fascinated, like you're saying, Ashish, by stories and storytelling. I've used stories as a trainer in health and safety. I tell stories. I'd really be interested in studying that. Is that actually something I can study in this? Because I really wasn't sure. I thought maybe it's too much of a people skill or something. He's like, no, human and social dimensions, John, of course. It would be a good complementary. The risk seems to be more on the analytical side. It's not. We can come back to that if you want, but stories, absolutely. So then, that focused me, and I took a course in creative nonfiction taught by Professor Lee Gutkind, who is the editor of the Journal of Creative Nonfiction, and he's referred to as the godfather of creative nonfiction. You couldn't get a better guy to take that course from, and I learned so much from him. Like, John, what's at stake? Don't give me all of this long, drawn-out background, something that a lot of us technical experts do. We think we have to give every detail. Yeah. Really good at putting juries to sleep, the exact opposite of what you want to do, right? And so I just learned so much, and the more I got into it, the more I loved it, and the more I've learned, and I keep learning every day.
And you also have a favorite quote that you mentioned, which you picked from Michael Quinn Patton.
Yep.
Which goes like, no data without narrative and no narrative without data. And I think that also aligns with the earlier thing that we talked about, that chronologies are not stories.
They're not.
So what does that mean in practice for your expert witness work?
Right. I learned from an engineer who was a director of a school of engineering at Arizona State, that he said, I think Newton was the first to say, if I see farther, it is only because I stand on the shoulders of giants. Yeah. Right. Because it gets attributed to Einstein or, who knows, whoever. Oppenheimer maybe is common, these days because of the movie and all of that. So Michael Quinn Patton is really great qualitative research. Okay. And at how do we really evaluate things? And those two, that's not a coincidence. Those two relate very, very well. I think one of the biggest problems we have in a lot of things is we believe in this falsehood that everything needs to be quantitative, and it doesn't. If you really want to understand something qualitative, and I'm biased towards it because I study it, I use it, but that's what's important. Numbers are never going to convince a jury, right? Feelings do, and stories do. And so I attended a keynote by Michael Quinn Patton. The guy's amazing. He did this wonderful keynote, and I'm sitting there, and it was for the School of Sustainability, and opens it up to questions. And people ask him a bunch of questions about sustainability and about evaluation and about qualitative research methods. All great. What's my one big thing? Autistic. One big thing that I love? Storytelling. And so I wait and I raise my hand. He goes, I think we have time for one more question. Yes, the young man there. And I'm like, where? And he's like, no, you, right? I probably said the bald-headed guy, right? Because it's just easier, right? And so everyone laughed. And I'm like, great. And I said, hey, Dr. Patton, that was really wonderful. I'm really curious because I studied this. I didn't hear you say anything about stories and storytelling. I was wondering if you could talk about that. And as soon as I said you didn't say anything about stories, the look on his face was one of, oh my God, of course, how could I forget that? And then, and he's like, oh, what a great question. I can't believe I didn't say it. The conventional wisdom these days is, and there was the quote, no data without narrative, no narrative without data. And I have never forgotten that. I have used it. I have told people. So it's not like throw out your data and only tell these wonderfully fun stories. No, not at all, right? The world is not binary. They're not mutually exclusive. Weave your data into it. And there's actually I'll call it a genre, a subgenre, I guess, maybe, of data storytelling. How do we tell stories using data? How do we weave data into the stories? And a good movie example, I think, I like the movie, is The Hunt for Red October. Okay. Tom Clancy's first techno thriller. I read the book, loved the book, watched the movie several times, loved the movie, could go on and on about it, of course. Lots of technology, lots of data, lots of jargon. Clancy does an excellent job of weaving that into the story without doing something that in storytelling we call a data dump, right? Or an information dump. You don't want to do that, where you just, as a narrator, are giving all of this data. All of a sudden you lose your reader, listener, viewer, whatever it is. So yeah, so I think, and Michael Quinn Patton is a giant. I stand on his shoulders if I can see farther. And he really knew that. And I think that is key and something that a lot of experts and others don't realize how critical it is.
But I believe that stories move people in ways that probably data cannot, which is where the whole narrative comes in. And you've studied Dr. Paul Zach's research on oxytocin and storytelling. So please talk about that. I think that's very fascinating.
It is. So anyone looking it up, his last name is Zach, Z-A-K, Paul Zach, as you said, Ashish. And he studied oxytocin. So here is the story he tells. So now I'm telling his story, which is narrative framing, which is actually a good technique, which we could come back to, right? And so imagine you're on a plane and the person next to you, you don't know them, is watching something on their laptop, and that person is experiencing what they will describe as body-racking sobs. They are crying so much that their body is heaving in the seat. The tears are pouring down. And you're very concerned. This is so extreme. Are you okay? Are you, oh, so sorry. It's so sad. $1 Million Baby, if you're familiar with that movie. Oh my God, right? And there are so many great movies that are like that, right? And so you go about your business. Now, what you don't realize, of course, is it's Dr. Paul Zach. He is a scientist, a researcher, and he does study oxytocin, more from a marketing standpoint. And persuasion research goes into these two large areas. One is I want to sell you something, and the other is I want you to behave in a healthier, safer way, right? And so both of those really fit for what I do as a health and safety practitioner. And so he goes, okay, I know we experience, the willing suspension of disbelief, but oh my God, that was over the top. What's going on? So he goes back to his lab with his group, and they design a study where they recruit volunteers and they're going to show them two different videos. The videos are on the same thing. There's a dad and his son. They're actually actors, right? And the dad is talking about the son has cancer, and the cancer might be terminal, et cetera, et cetera. And there's two versions of this. One version, and they get the same information, but it's the way they get it. So one is very informational about it, and the other is very much in narrative, in a story form. And they measure the oxytocin levels of the control group and the study group. And as you can easily imagine, right, you can predict where this is going. The control group, the oxytocin levels, steady, low, nothing. The story group, right at, if you use, say, like Gustav Freytag's pyramid, which is one way, there's setting, right, exposition, rising action, story peak and climax, which happens not in the middle, but towards the end usually. I won't go far into that. Descending action and denouement resolution. Story peak and climax, which really happens towards the very, very end, is where everything is going on. And what did Dr. Zach's team find? Oxytocin levels spiked during that, especially the more emotional, so affective. Right? Not affective. If you want to be effective, be affective, meaning you have to bring emotions into it. We're wired for stories based on neuroscience and evolution, and stories just make sense to us. Chronologies are not necessarily very good ways of telling a story, right? And so this is something that Robert McKee, the teacher to screenwriters in Hollywood, and he's written many books about it, will say chronologies, journals, biographies, biographical sketches, etc. I loved what you said about me. That was great. Thank you. Right in the intro, it wasn't a story, right? It talked about a bunch of things, but that's not a story. And we use story too much. And so there's these two terms, the fabula, which is the chronology, which our mind works on to take the bits and pieces, and then it's a Russian word, sujet. Like, you'll have to look it up, or anyone can look it up. And that translates, as I recall, to as told. Oh, okay. And so flashbacks, flash forwards, and picking and choosing and all of that. Our brain actually likes that if you do it really well. And our brain, if you give the right signs, clues, do signposting as it's called, etc. If you do that well, then the reader, viewer, listener can figure out the exact chronology, but it actually makes more sense from a storytelling perspective because you focus on the important things at critical junctures throughout the story.
So given the technical nature of your expertise, and given that you are an expert witness where attorneys would ask you a question and you're expected to only answer that question, how do you weave a story there? Like, what is the scope for a story to come in and help your balanced storytelling with the constraints of expert witness rules, where you're answering only the question? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think I would start with think in terms of something I learned that is called communication accommodation theory. Okay. And it's really simple. We speak differently under all sorts of different situations with different people. And so I can't remember who originated that. But the other that I do know is in discourse analysis, so the analysis of the spoken or written word. James Paul G. is a professor of psycholinguistics at Arizona State, says context always matters. So right now, we're having a conversation. It's a conversation. You're interviewing me, but it's a dialogue. I'm doing more. You're helping. You're the driver, and I'm providing the color commentary, I guess, right? A lot of the content. I wouldn't be telling these longer stories, these longer answers, in court or in a deposition, especially if it seems like it's really bordering more on a story, especially if the story is self-serving. Opposing counsel is not going to stand for that, right? They're going to object. So the first thing is, and I'll go back to that good quote that I did not originate, but I love it, is brevity is wit. So how do I pick and choose just what I need? And also, is there a story? Certainly not every answer I give is in story form, but sometimes I will use storytelling aspects, right? So like that thing with Paul Zach, right? Right. I said, I'm now telling it in his, as he told it in writing. But then I got out of the story and I gave a little bit of explanation. So not the best storytelling, because you don't want to come out of the story, because then you lose your reader, listener, viewer. We usually say receiver to be all encompassing. But I did it because I wanted to explain something. So that really illustrates how I might start in a story and then go into an explanation and then go back to the story. So I have a little greater control over it, and it doesn't come across as only self-serving, rambling storytelling where I'm actually dealing with that. Sometimes I will absolutely just say, yes or no, when they might want me to say more, and I'll say no. And then they'll have to follow up, because I know not to give a whole lot of more explanations. Here's a big problem that industrial hygiene folk and other technical people have. We want to clarify everything. Mm-hmm. And as an autistic, I want to clarify like the world. And that just opens up risk, because the other side then, well, now you introduce the topic, they can now grill you, question you on it. So I have to really be very purposeful in how I choose, what I choose, and whether I do want to keep it really short and let them, or whether I want to try to weave in, maybe do, data storytelling, as Michael Quinn Patton would probably recommend and would probably call it. Or, do I want to just be a little bit more on the technical side for whatever specific reason? It can't be self-serving, though. It has to serve the purposes of the case.
And from storytelling, let me use this to segue into this other concept of humor. And we did talk about how self-deprecating humor works well, and that's what you used for your persona at the Arizona State University. But you were also telling me during our pre-podcast discussion that in one of your cases, probably your first or second case, during more litigation, you ended up making the jury laugh. And the attorney, in fact, mentioned it in her letter to you.
Yeah. So I still have the letter.
Yeah. Can you tell us what happened there, and was the humor intentional or spontaneous? Right. And how do you use humor in testimony?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's all good. You have to really be careful. And it was very spontaneous. I didn't even realize what was going to happen. It wasn't like I was telling a joke. So what was happening? It was my second case. My first case was the deposition that I did not do well. I really failed.
Yeah, we'll come to that.
Yeah. No, I know. That'll be good. It'll be a good story, right? We learn best from what we get wrong. But in this case, it went really well. So this was the mold case. This was the competing experts, their samples, my samples. So I'm in the chair, the witness chair. Opposing counsel doesn't, it's not me that they don't like, but I'm in the way of their winning the case. That's something important to keep in mind. Check your ego at the door. It ain't about you, right? So he says, Mr. Klane, I want you to look at sample number, blah, 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 32. Okay. And he hands me legal paper size with an Excel with the smallest font you can imagine, big gaps between the lines, and no grid line. Like absolutely the worst case. But there's data streams going across. And the sample number is on this side. I'm off camera. And the results are way on the other, and there isn't this line. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at it and trying, and I can't quite. And I'm like, there's no grid lines. I can't see. I don't think it's sample 32. I think you mean sample 31, but I can't tell. So I'm honest. I can't answer your question because what you just handed me is not clear. I said, I don't have a straight edge. And so without thinking, he takes, they always have this big legal pad, right? Yeah. Usually yellow.
Yeah.
And he says, here, use this. And I'm like, okay. And I use it. And I'm like, yeah, okay, definitely. I don't think you mean 32. I think you mean 31. Because now I could tell. And he looks down at his copy and he says, in a complaining voice, well, now I don't have a straight edge, right? And without thinking, I took what he had given me and I said, here, you can use mine. And I must have smiled or something. And I heard the jury laugh. And I thought, oh, that was interesting. I really didn't think much of it, right? Mm-hmm. And this was pre-autism diagnosis. I can be clueless at times to other people and their reactions and all of that. And you're not supposed to be staring at the jury either. That's bad form, obviously. So you don't try not to. But I distinctly heard them laugh, right? Mm-hmm. And so then he took it and then we did the back and forth. So now, here's storytelling. You don't need to know the rest. Cut to the end of the day. Everyone, absolutely everyone has gone from the courtroom except for me and the two attorneys that were my client. And they look around to make sure no one is hearing. And they're like, oh my God, that was fantastic. Mm-hmm. And this is like an hour later or something like that. I'm like, what? And they said, you made the jury laugh. That's the golden ticket. I'm like, really? And they're like, oh my God, that was fantastic. I'm like, I didn't even plan it. So, spontaneous humor, I think we all know is really the best. You go to a comedy show and all of a sudden the comedian says something that's just, maybe someone was heckling and they came up with something. Those are really funny moments because you go, wow, he just or she just came up with that. The planned jokes that are obviously a joke, they can be really funny, but you go, okay, it's a joke, right? And so that spontaneity, I think really helped. And I think the jury, were they laughing with me? Were they laughing at him? Was it a little bit of self-deprecation? Was it just that I had turned it around on the other and they were like, they got a kick out of that? Was I coming across as more of a friendly person, a friendly expert? Maybe his grilling of me, they didn't like, There's a lot of things that I would never know, and it could be a combination of those, right? So I'm not about to try to use a joke, right? Unless I think maybe get away with it. But I really, again, it has to be purposeful and not like I'm trying to be a stand-up comic in a courtroom or something like that. That just wouldn't fit. I could give you an example of what I would do versus what I wouldn't do I think you might be interested.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
So I certainly would not use any sort of potentially offending humor, right? I'm not about to bring into it anything remotely. I'm probably not going to do anything political these days. Not going to do anything about gender and sex and racist, nothing like that. And those are pretty extremes, right? Save those for the comedy clubs where that's the setting. Context always matters. In a comedy club, you're supposed to push the envelope, push the limits. Not in court. So I thought about this. What would be an example? So the other thing I was thinking of is I wouldn't use what's called scatological humor. Okay. And that's just a fancy way of saying potty humor, right? Talking about poop or whatever, right? It wouldn't make sense. But I thought, there's always exceptions like we were talking about before. Well, what if the case were about exposure to backed up sewage? Which, I've run into that sort of a thing. And so I'm thinking about this. Could there be a situation? And I thought, if an attorney, maybe my client, maybe opposing counsel, were to reference, maybe there's different samples, maybe there's different stages or whatever, and they were to say, well, what about this second phase of sampling? And I'm like, oh, you mean phase number 2? And just leave it.
Mm-hmm.
And well, so what's number 2? Right? Number 2 is poop, right? Or pooping. And so it wouldn't be like I go, ha ha ha, that's, poop, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would be, phase, and there's the inflection. This is in discourse analysis, if you're listening, that upward glide, right? Phase number 2, right? As opposed to, phase number 2, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing there. But if you say phase number 2, right? It's almost like there's an implied question mark, sort of, or an ellipse, the 3 dots, right? There's a little bit more, but you just let it hang, right? As the metaphor goes, that you don't, because the human mind loves making the connection. Yeah. And this is important in storytelling and other things, but especially in storytelling. You cannot be so obvious that you spoon feeding stuff to your reader, listener, viewer, right? Mm-hmm. And because the human mind wants to pick up the little clues, the hints, and put them together and say, oh, I think I know what's going on. There's research on this, that we sometimes get a shot of dopamine, another feel-good chemical, right? Oxytocin is, the human love and bonding chemical, but dopamine is a wonderful feel-good chemical, right? I'm probably getting dopamine right now because I'm just having a blast doing this, right? And so that making a connection, I recall reading a study that says, yes, there's good evidence that in some cases we do get a shot of dopamine, which might help us, but it can also lead us astray where we're making connections that aren't there, right? So do I use humor? Do I not? I tend away from it, but it can help at least like break the tension. That's what I would say humor is best at.
Mm-hmm. So from what I'm hearing, basically don't go in predetermined that, okay, I'm going to start with a joke. Again, like you're an expert witness, you're not a comedian, but at the same time, if the opportunity presents, if something comes naturally to you, something that's not offensive, that's not derogatory. I mean, if it's self-deprecating, that's a different thing. But yeah, if it's witty, might as well go for it.
Right. Right. The one thing I would quickly caution
mm-hmm.
is self-deprecating humor in a deposition or in court.
Okay.
And because the concern with the risk is the opposing counsel will just go for it.
Yeah.
We'll say, you just said that you're not the smartest guy. Let's talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't you the smart? And you were trying to make light of it, but you've now introduced the topic. Yeah. And of course, the opposing counsel knows that you're not talking literally, but you've opened yourself up to that. So that's one of those that you really have to be careful about doing.
Yeah. And I think the other risk can be that if it's a deposition, your sarcasm and self-deprecating wit may not translate well into the written text.
Oh, why?
So the transcript is not going to capture your tone and the way you raise your eyebrows or roll your eyes. So yeah, it's better to.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. It's not like, so I wrote a story over the weekend, we were chatting about that, and you have to indicate, what the characters are doing and all, because that's more powerful than dialogue. And I love dialogue, sometimes too much. And so, so you have to, but a deposition is strictly the court reporter, right? Doing that. These days, there's usually a videographer, but still it's usually you're reading the deposition. It's strictly text, and it's horrible to read. So the beryllium case that I had, my primary attorney client said, John, give me your address. I need to send you all of these printed depositions. I'm like, okay. Gave him my address. He's like, you're going to receive, it's like an envelope. He's like, it's a box. It's a box of deposition. And I'm like, okay. And he said, and you know the saying, John, if you've read one deposition, you've read one deposition too many, which I didn't know that saying, but he did. He's an attorney, and I've never, and so lots of billable time, I will tell you. They were a little surprised, but I'm like, you guys sent me a box, right? Like 9 inches. And I read those. You didn't tell me, you said you need to read these. And I read those. That takes time, man.
Yeah.
And so they're like, okay, yeah, no, we get it. And so, and it was pretty horrible reading the depositions, and not just my own, just these things can be so boring. And at the same, like, oh my God, eye glazing
And long,
and,
yeah.
and long. And you go, what is this person saying? What is opposing counsel trying to do? Why are they, it's just horrible. So yeah, but at least you get paid.
So, John, talking of horrible depositions, let's talk about the first deposition went cataclysmically badly. So, that's the phrase you used. So, tell us what happened.
I have to be careful about what I say in public. People will quote me back and all. And it would be somewhat amusing. I mean, it's very amusing with you, Ashish. It would be only somewhat amusing if an attorney found that and used it against me, but I would be fine. So what happened? It was my very first one, and I knew nothing about what a deposition was supposed to be. And I will also add, being autistic, a little bit clueless to things and want to help the conversation. And so I was just not a good expert witness. Now, the problem from my client's side is, and I've told other attorneys this, and they're like, what? Oh my God. I got zero prep. None. I don't mean that it was like we met and only talked a little. I mean nothing. No preparation, no nothing. And the attorney was not there. And this was decades ago. I was not as old as I am now. I was probably 30 something, right? So I had a very junior attorney. I don't know. Was he even out of law school, clerking or something like that? And he was there. He did no prep. And so he said nothing. And every single deposition since that time, every deposition I've read, every deposition I've had the displeasure of being in, there's always objections by both sides.
Yeah.
They pepper it. Form and function. Yeah. If I hear the words form and function again, oh my God. Right? So I got grilled, and totally my bad. I had made a miscalculation. I had not double checked using one of these. I had only done it using this calculator, and I was off by, I think, a decimal place, which is, I think, kind of significant. It actually made the data closer, but because it was a mistake, it really killed the deposition, according to my client. And I believe the case settled or whatever, very low. I didn't hear anything. But boy, did I learn several lessons there. One, if I've got any calculations, I'm going to double check it with a calculator, make sure I've got everything. Is my data 100%? Have I reversed any numbers, right? And then also, what about preparation? What should I expect? Right? How is the attorney, my client, preparing me for this? Not telling me what to say. I've never had a client tell me, I want you to say. They never even say, I want you to say. And we can get into that too. But preparation should absolutely be a conversation, a dialogue, back and forth, with me asking questions and them answering, with them asking me questions and me answering, and just this back and forth conversation of it. And then they should be there and help guide it. And in particular, I guess I'd say this one thing too: where do they want me to go down paths and where don't they? Because there'll be times when I'll want to clarify, but my client doesn't care for me to do that,
Yeah.
doesn't need me to for their case. It makes a difference to me, but that shouldn't matter. It should only matter about the case. And so he or she might tell me, if they ask you about, fill in the blank, the sample, feel free to clarify. But if they ask you about the conclusion, it's yes or no, which it often is closed-ended, right? Just do that. And then if I want to pursue it, I'll pursue it. You can leave stuff on the table that, you just never cover, never clarify. And it's because I don't want to pursue it in the deposition. I don't want to open us up to that conversation in the deposition, because the deposition fills a very specific function for the attorneys.
So
Did I learn my lessons the hard way? Sorry.
That's what I was going to ask. So do you now require attorneys to have a pre-deposition discussion, workshop on every case before you go into one?
Yeah, and I don't even have to require it. So, and there are certain attorneys that I've worked for more than others, but even the ones that I'm brand new for, and not every case goes to deposition or to court, as we talked about. But yes, absolutely. They will always say, let's schedule, a couple of days. Let's schedule a week out. Let's schedule a couple of days out. Sometimes we'll do multiple sessions, depending upon where we are and what has occurred. Let's do one week out, John. And then, there might be additional things that, the other counsel and I talk about, and I'm going to want to prepare you in advance of that. And so we'll do one the day before. Let's get that on our calendars now. And if we don't have it on the calendars, I'm going to say, can we get it on the calendars? Because I don't, I want to make sure I'm available. Yeah, let's do that now, John. If they know we're going to go to deposition or to court.
And John, now I would like to talk a little bit about your diagnosis that happened later in life. And you were diagnosed to be on the autism spectrum, and you've publicly spoken about it, about what that means for your work. And so would you please share a bit about that journey and how that diagnosis changed how you understand your own strength as an expert witness?
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm so glad I finally got the diagnosis. It was very late in life. And it was through counseling and then, through other testing, etc. And I'm even a participant in an autism in adults study where I had to get the diagnosis additionally validated for the purposes of research. And so once I got the diagnosis, it explained so much of my life. Why don't I always understand social cues and social norms, right? Why do I get those things often wrong? And I could tell many funny stories about that. Pretty much self-serving stories, because we're really focused on being an expert witness here. But and I still keep learning today. It's like, oh my God, how did I not even think about fill in the blank, whatever, the way I do bicycling. So this is a short one. This will illustrate it. My mom used to tell me, Johnny, in nursery school, you were such a good boy. The teachers always told me, Johnny's so good. I'm like, how? I didn't think I was a good boy. How was I good, Mom? Oh, they'd say, oh, Mrs. Klane, Johnny will come in and he'll go right over to the tricycle that he really likes and he'll get on it and he'll ride in circles over and over and over again. Well, you go, okay, back when I was a little kid, no one knew really. I mean, autism existed as a diagnosis, but no, the knowledge base was not there. Yeah. But you cut to today, if that were the case, the teachers would go, we should let the parents know that they ought to get that child screened, right? That's fairly obvious. Well, what do? I go out on my bike every day. It's not a tricycle anymore. And I don't go in little circles. I go in big circles. I have a big loop that I do, the same one. It's 5 miles, and I do it over and over again. Not too many times these days. But you can see how things just, consistently through life. So segueing into, how does it help me? So it's hugely eye-opening and explains so much. It explains why I go so deep into topics. why I love certain things, right? I said, don't get me started about pop culture from, back in the day, 60s and 70s. I can go on and on. In court or in depositions or in analysis, one of the things is that autistics are known to be good at, besides going very deep into things, which helps with data, and I'll come back to that, is trend recognition, pattern recognition. And trends we think of like on a graph. Patterns can be more like a pattern in a fabric that we would see. And so there's good use of metaphors, right? Although I think I said like, so that's really an analogy. So, and there's a reason I'm making that distinction. It's not semantic pedanticness. I can come back to that. Always use a metaphor if you can instead of an analogy is my recommendation. And there's good science. So here's a micro story. I was telling a colleague that I was autistic. And she said, John, I could tell. And I'm like, how could you tell? And she said 2 reasons. 1, you go deeper into topics than anyone I know.
Okay.
And she said, and I've worked with autistic people. My undergrad, she said, is in psychology. I know what autism looks like. And I said, okay, great. I love that. What's the other? She said, that data table we gave you. Oh my God. And I'm like, oh yeah, the one with 1,345 lines. And she said, who knows that a data table has 1,345 lines just like that? I mean, and this was a couple of months ago, John. And I'm like, I don't know. I just know it had 1,345 lines. She's like, yeah. And I gave it to you. And in an hour and a half, it didn't do anything for giving you the information you needed. And in an hour and a half, you dissected it, you modified it, you made it look really visually understandable, and it told you and it told us exactly the data that we needed. Who does that except, some autistic guy? And I thought, okay, yeah, that explains some of my love of Excel, huge tables, looking at data, finding the pattern, finding the qualitative patterns in the data, which I've had to do gap analyses of education, which is really a mixed methods approach, which mixed methods is just jargon for using both quantitative and qualitative measures or approaches. And even storytelling, right? We're known as storytellers. We love stories because we can go very deep. My professor in qualitative research methods, when I asked her, she's on my committee, Professor Sonia Klinsky. She's wonderful. She's a sustainability professor. I'm like, Sonia, how is it I became the story guy? I'm autistic. I thought, we don't necessarily like reading stories. She said, yeah, autistics don't like reading stories. And she's had many students and PhD candidates who were autistic. She said, but what you learned on your own was how you can use data storytelling to illustrate what's going on with all of the details that are so important to you, and you can weave them into this wonderful, narrative that really works. And you figured it out intuitively before you got your diagnosis. And I'm like, okay, that makes total sense. Thanks.
And now do you see connections between how your mind works and why you excel in what you do?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, I still have challenges, right? One of the things is we tend not to always understand. You mentioned like sarcasm and all. I don't always intuitively get sarcasm, right? I mean, yeah, I know what sarcasm is, but it doesn't feel natural. It feels like, am I being insulted? What's going on? Even if they're kidding, right? And so there's challenges to it, but it really helps me in a lot of ways. Here's the joke. I don't mind doing a joke. And I saw this. I didn't originate this joke. I saw it by another autistic. We take things literally. You know who takes things literally? Kleptomaniacs. And you've probably heard it before, right? And you go, Oh, I get it. I get it, right? It's a pun. Well, I love puns, and I got my love of puns from my mom, right? And so that twist of the words.
Yeah.
Why do I love that? What is it that it's doing? Why do I like categorize? I categorize everything. As part of my diagnosis. So if a child is being diagnosed, they do a lot of observation. Well, I'm an adult, and my parents have been dead for years.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, do a life self-reflection. Think about your life and just start writing down some of the different things, and we'll review them. So I started writing different things, typing them up. 10, 20, 30, somewhere between 30 and 40. I'm like, oh, I need to categorize these because there's too many. It's too long of a list. I'm going to break them out into categories, which a lot of people do, not just autism. And so I started categorizing, creating more categories. I got up to, I think, 82 different things across 7 categories. And all of a sudden, then I'm like, and this, what I'm doing, right? This systematic way of looking at my own life and doing that. And of course, they're human behaviors, but as it was explained to me by the director of research at the Southwest Autism Research and Resource Center, where I was additionally diagnosed, she said, John, you're human. Everything you do is human. Autistics are human. They're human traits, but they are much more common in autistics. And in autistics, they are much stronger traits, like exponentially stronger traits than they are across neurotypical.
So this was actually very powerful because my key takeaway is that, and from whatever little understanding I have, is it looks like channeled well, it's pretty much a superpower that has worked for you. Again, I mean, there are those the missing of the social cues or the sarcasm, but then it powers it brings to you that extra focused analytical mind that would probably be an addition to your powers as an expert witness. And that is where I want to ask you, what do you think attorneys should know? And this is not about you or only experts in industrial hygiene.
Sure.
But working with neurodivergent, I mean, I don't know if that is the right word to use, but again, like you were diagnosed pretty late in life. So many experts or other professionals may not know, may not have been diagnosed yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are a few people I know from law school who have been diagnosed later in life.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is your advice to attorneys on working with experts who maybe are neurodivergent,
Right.
where they are aware about their diversity, or maybe they are unaware, but they're not neurotypical? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's a really great question, Ashish. I think, and I love educating others. That's become a huge purpose in my life now, is how do I educate others about this? So the first thing is most people, the vast majority, are neurotypical. So it just means that we have I can't say we, that most people have neurotypical. And I don't know what other people have, but most are neurotypical. And then you have the neurodivergent, and that is a good term. But neurodivergent incorporates several different diagnoses. And so autism is one, ADHD is another, and those two can be combined into ADHD, AU, not the chemical symbol for gold in this case, right? ADHD, also OCD is considered one. Tourette's is considered one. I actually had a student in one of my grad classes who had Tourette's. That was interesting, and he was a very good student. And then also dyslexia challenge with letters and reading and all, and dyscalculia. Oh, and dysgraphia. So dyscalculia is challenges with numbers, often reversing them, but that's not the sole trait. And then dysgraphia, having to do with visuals. And then also you can have other aspects, proprioception problems, meaning spatial awareness. So they're all challenges. It doesn't mean we can't do that. So I'm autistic, and I do have dyslexia and dyscalculia as well. So I have to double check. Word is very good about catching if I misspell, if I reverse letters, but not numbers. So once I had an expense report that I couldn't balance, and it was because I had reversed two numbers in the cents column of the hotel room taxes on one day. Mm-hmm. But the very nice woman in customer support helped me find that mistake. So to your question, I think what I would focus on for this purpose is autism, because I think that's really, that's my major diagnosis, and that's really what drives me. And that's really who I am. I am autistic, right? And even in my language, you've probably picked up on it and others have. I don't say I have autism. I say I am autistic. Yeah. I then do say I have dyslexia and dyscalculia. Sometimes I will say I'm dyslexic, but then I've never heard people use the term I'm dyscalculate. Mm-hmm. Right? So that becomes a little awkward, right? But I will always say I am autistic. Mm-hmm. Everything I say, everything I do, everything I write is being processed by an autistic brain, So it's good to know that. And it's good to know, well, you call them superpowers. That's a lot of people do use that phrase. And so I recognize it. I do think it gives me certain abilities, right? That others might not have. The difference between skills and abilities is often that skills, we can gain skills, but sometimes abilities are innate. They are within us, right? And so my being autistic is, gives me certain abilities that you can gain some of the skills, but it would never be the same as, my abilities being autistic. And so the challenge is, how much of that do I know? How much of that do I know about myself? Right? And so I think if an attorney is hiring an expert and the expert is autistic, or the attorney maybe suspect that expert may be, because they can go very, very deep and they'll talk quite a bit, and et cetera, et cetera. There's all sorts of different things. And, I should preface this with the reason it's called a spectrum is it is so diverse, not just wide, but very diverse. Mm-hmm. And so there is that diversity. And so an autistic person may wish to go on and on. As I said before, I want to clarify everything, right? I've been asked about that by counselors. John, why do you always want to clarify everything? That was before my diagnosis. And so now I understand that about why I do that, and I will hold back on purpose, even in conversation at times. And so I think an attorney has to be a good, gentle coach about that. Hey, John, I need you to bring your expertise and your deep expertise, but here's the challenge and you could say that I have as an attorney. If you go too deep, if you open it up, if you talk about other things that the other side hasn't asked you about, you open yourself up to them now challenging you on it. And I learned that from attorneys. They told me that. So I think it still comes back to this conversation to try to really understand. And it doesn't even have to be that the attorney says, hey, I think you're autistic, or are you autistic, or anything. It can be, hey, I've really noticed you're good at this, or hey, I've seen that you have a tendency to, fill in the blank, whatever that action or behavior is. Mm-hmm. It can be super helpful. Yeah. And so for me, I always want very specific directions. You want me to do something? Tell me exactly what you want me to do. Because here's the thing. My brain is taking whatever you say literally. And if you use euphemisms, or if it allows any sort of conclusion of generality, like if you say it, maybe I'm not sure which it you mean, right? And so it can be a great challenge in that regard, Ashish.
So, John, this is probably my last question to you today. And then if you've missed something that you'd want to talk about, we'll definitely go there. But you've described yourself in 5 words: creative, logical, humorous, philosophical, and a storyteller. So, if you could only pass on one piece of wisdom to a new expert witness, and it can be an industrial hygienist or otherwise, what would that one piece of wisdom be?
Become a better storyteller. Yeah, you're already a storyteller. You're probably a decent storyteller. You may be a very good one, right? Use storytelling, right? Don't utilize it. Use storytelling with purpose. Not random, not gratuitous, not self-serving, not war stories. Purposeful storytelling. I think that's key. It's very effective when you let it be effective. So do data storytelling, but make sure you focus on a character, a single character that your story receiver can relate to, right? There is that saying, 1,000,000 people die. One person dies, it's a tragedy. 1,000,000 people die, it's a statistic. There's good science behind that quote, right? And so purpose-told storytelling, right? Purposeful. So you showed me Don Miller's Building a Story Brand 2.0.
Yeah.
Here's the first one. I read that. I enjoyed it. I wanted more. And, Amazon and others are like, hey, you liked Building a Story Brand. Maybe you'd like, sorry, I'm getting the light here.
Storynomics. Story-driven marketing in the post-advertising world. Yeah, that's interesting. Robert McKee. Yeah, we'll pick a cover from Amazon and put it in the show notes. Perfect. And
so
that's a good book.
If you have to choose, we like this. If you have to choose Storynomics by McKee, and it's either Garris or Garachi. I don't know how he pronounces his name. McKee is the storyteller guru, and Tom Garris, is the business professional. And they do a wonderful job about this. It's really focused on marketing, but again, persuasion science, persuasion research is about marketing or sales, and about, I want to keep you healthier. I want you to engage in healthier and safer behaviors, public health, basically, public health, public safety. And so that would be the one I would do. As long as we're on the topic of books, Storytelling for Lawyers by Philip N. Meyer is a great book geared exactly to attorneys. And so it was written in 2013. I've read some of it. I've looked through his detailed table of contents, and I've dived into it, and I really like it. He's a great writer. He's a great storyteller. He's an attorney. He's a law school professor, etc. Can't think of a better book if you're an attorney and you want to improve your storytelling skills. But if you're an expert, then get better at it. You've got skills. Learn what works. Learn what doesn't work. Learn how to weave your data into it. Follow Michael Quinn Patton's advice that we already spoke about, right? Don't give up your data. Weave it into micro stories. That's a challenge for me that I like, and I'm doing that work for a client. where I'm developing 140 micro stories. Each one ends with a call to action. And then they take my micro stories and use AI to turn it into videos. And so by making them incredibly brief, how do I tell a story in under a minute?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That becomes very important as well. So those are the bits of advice. I like creativity. I like being purposeful, being logical. I think I've forgotten one. But I would have to say for advice, it's the powers, plural, of stories should not be ignored. Here's a quote from Aristotle. I got this from another story researcher whose name also is Jonathan. I forget his last name. Go figure.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that Aristotle in the Poetics, which is often quoted, right? That's how we got the three acts of a story, is often quoted in many things. And he gave a quote that I had not heard, which was Aristotle said, "We have to kill all the poets." Now, Aristotle did not mean this literally.
Yeah.
And he didn't hate poetry. Poets of old, like Homer, who told, the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? It was all in poem form, right? Ancient writing,
Mm-hmm.
right, could go into this. The Edda, etc., right, was very, very often in the form of poems because, of course, there's a pattern, there's a rhythm, there might be rhymes, there might not, but it was a very natural manner of telling stories. Aristotle recognized that storytellers who were really, really good at it, their superpower to get at storytelling superpowers, have that ability, and they can use that tool for good or for evil, right? And that's really critical. I'll give you this one little bit. Another researcher, I believe Professor Nunn, Nunn, I believe it is he, did a study about a hunter-gatherer population. So we would call it a tribe, let's say, but a current hunter-gatherer population. And he studied storytelling. And one of the things he was able to discern was that storytellers had a lot of great skills, superpowers. And one of the benefits was this, and he used the euphemism: they experienced greater reproductive success.
Oh, okay.
And you go, wait, does that just mean they had more kids? And I'm thinking it's that they had more partners.
Yes.
Not just, we're cranking out more children. And so you go, really? Is that a power of storytelling? Well, I guess I've got that going for me.
John,
To end on a humorous note.
John, thank you so much. This was probably, like the most interesting and exciting conversation I've had on this podcast over 3 seasons. It's the first one that has gone on beyond the 1 hour, 30-minute mark. So that goes on to say something. And there's so many topics that we can still talk about. But
yeah,
is there anything that I've missed that you would like to add before we wrap this up?
We, in our prep, we had discussed different things, and you had wanted to know a little bit about the studies I did. And I think I've talked a lot about storytelling specifically and the powers. There's plenty more we could explore. But one of the things, another study I did that you picked up on, was I did a study that compared, and I think this is important, it compared in training. Which is more effective? Is it stories or is it humor? And I think that's important because we've talked about both.
Yeah.
And so in that study, which I did at Arizona State, I didn't publish it. It was interventional. I just needed to understand which was working better. I was doing 21 safety trainings per semester, a ton. Lab safety, fire safety, biosafety, etc. And so with the help of a professor, we designed a study where I took the material, same material, and I divided it because each Each course had 2 different sections. And so for one section, I delivered the same material in strictly humorous form, but not using funny stories. So jokes, basically. And then in the other, I did it in story form, but not funny stories, right? So more emotionally laden stories like we've talked about. And so that gave us the ability to really compare. And there was one section, so this was actually freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. And there was one, I think it was the sophomores, where there was only one section. So I actually merged them. Well, we gave them a pre-test of the material. They all bombed. Great. We didn't count it towards their grade. They still hated it. Then we did it 3 weeks later. The priming effect is 2 weeks, as I learned from another PhD who's now a professor. And so I waited another week, and we gave them a follow-up, and we scrambled everything. Scrambled the questions, scrambled the answers, etc. Everything was out of order, right? Maybe a few different ones, just so they didn't remember it, right? Everyone did great. Okay, good. They all improved. Oh, great delta, right? Huge delta, right? But there was no separation. They were all really close. Well, you don't really care how much they learn in 3 weeks. What you want to know is how much they retain, learning retention, right? And so we waited another 3 months till the end of the semester. So now we're almost 4 months out, right? And we tested them again without any prep before it. And again, we scrambled everything. Now we had great separation. So guess who did the worst? Guess who did the best? Because there was big separation, significant.
The folks with the story did better.
So it's funny when I've asked people without a lot of prefacing knowledge, we've had this extensive conversation, right? Most will guess, oh, the humor did better. Like, no, the humor did the worst. The ones who got stories did the best. Sometimes they'll guess, oh, that section that got both together did the best. Nope, even they did not. And so you go, what's going on? Well, unbeknownst to us, there was another lab group doing a study on humor, right? And I think they published theirs, which is great. And unbeknownst to them, we were doing ours on stories, really. And what did they learn? That humor is helpful to break the ice, but comes at a potential cost. Not everyone gets humor. We don't get it the same. And there's so much controversy these days that you might want to stray away from it. But if you can do some of the things we talked about, some of the just little bits, not really bad, don't take too much of a risk, maybe a little self-deprecation, don't go overboard on it, that'll probably help break the ice, that sort of stuff. But you got to be careful. But the stories, and there's fantastic science in this, right? About how we encode, how we remember, the bias of availability, all of these wonderful things. Tulving did great studies about this too. And certainly Kahneman and Tversky and Slovic and Fischoff and others. And the way I explain it is this. In the last year, Ashish, have you watched any stand-up comedians?
I know where you're going, but yeah, I did. I have. I've seen one.
Well, let's just say you have. I'll narrate this. Most people say, sure, John. Yeah, absolutely. I'm like, how many of the jokes do you remember? And they're like, kind of a few. Like, what do you remember about it? I remember that they were so funny, and I laughed. I laughed and laughed. Could you tell me everything they said? No, not a bit. Couple of jokes. Have you listened to, in a similar way, someone tell a really affective, emotionally laden story? Oh, yeah, definitely. Could you right now, if you wanted to, tell me that story? Not get it 100%, but tell me oh, yeah, you want me to? I could do that right now, John. And some of them will. Some of them will launch right into the story and tell it. And I'm like, that's the difference. Stories work in many, many neuroscience ways. And there's great research, and it is so based in our evolution. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. In fact, the comedian I watched this year, you wouldn't be familiar because he's an Indian comedian. He speaks he does his sets in Hindi. And he's the biggest name in the Indian comedy circle today, only because he does stories. So his whole set was basically a story about his childhood friend and his relationship with his father throughout the years growing up. And it was, and the jokes were a way to propel the story. So, and he's been doing this, is very different from other comedians, and which is why he's probably the best comedian in the country. He recently sold out at the Madison Square Garden in New York. And yeah, an Indian comedian doing a Hindi, he doesn't do English jokes. So it was a Hindi vernacular jokes, and he's pretty amazing. And his biggest superpower is he's a storyteller. So completely in line
Yeah.
with what you've been talking about. And yeah, so I
Nice.
couldn't agree more. Yeah.
That's great.
So, once again, thank you so much, John. This was an absolute pleasure. And I know we could have gone on for another couple of hours, and we'll definitely find time and talk more about, as you find new studies, as you come up with new stories, we'll definitely get you back on the show to get
Sure.
fresher perspectives
Sure.
on your work as an expert witness. And
Yeah.
what is the best way for listeners to get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. And so I wanted to say, first of all, thank you as well. This is wonderful. I had so much fun. And yeah,
Likewise.
imagine that, an autistic guy going on and on. We could go much longer. So, and I do want to be clear, I'm not yet, I don't have my PhD yet. I'm a PhD candidate. I hope to defend this coming semester. So maybe we'll get together again after that. And people can find me easily on LinkedIn. And people can find me on my ASU research page, which you can do a link to. That would be better.
Yeah.
Certainly, if they want to read some of the stuff I've done, my lab manager page as well. People can send me an email. I'll make it real easy for people. You can email me at baldstoryguy@asu.edu. So, yeah, we're allowed to create an alias. So, Bald, BALD, story guy, all one word, at ASU, Arizona State University, .edu will reach me. But I think it's easiest if you just go to LinkedIn and find me. Search for Jonathan Klane. Don't search for John, Jon Klane. You'll get my cousin, who is a Hollywood agent and filmmaker. And he would go, "What are you talking about? I have no idea."
So we'll definitely make sure that we link to your LinkedIn, we add your email and your lab manager profile as well in the show notes. So thank you so much for your time today, John.
Thank you, Ashish.
Thank
It was
you.
a pleasure.
Bye. Yeah. Bye, everyone. If you found this podcast useful, remember to subscribe and give us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. This will help other users find this podcast and benefit from the insights shared by our guests. If you'd like to be featured as a guest on this show, please write to media@xlitem.com. See you in the next episode.